Hello and welcome back to the Better Brain Blueprint. I'm your host, Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and I'm so excited for today's episode because we're jumping right into one of my favorite topics and something that's relevant for everyone. Today we're talking about food and how it builds, modifies, and powers our brains. We'll be exploring the best and the worst ways to nourish your brain and breaking down the key nutrients that have been shown to be associated with better and with worse brain function, as well as risk for brain issues. This topic is one that has been largely overlooked and for far too long, yet it's abundantly clear that how, what, and when we eat all have a role to play in how we think, act, and feel. Think about the last time you felt hangry or skipped a meal or two or three. Chances are good you can remember that your brain wasn't functioning in a great way. Another clear example of the power that nutrients can have on our brains is in the stimulating effects of caffeine and the disinhibiting effects of alcohol. Yet there's so much more nuance to this conversation. For example, did you know that in plants, and to some extent in animals, there is a family of thousands of nutrients that are now being studied for their role in brain health and protection against dementia and depression? This science is something that I didn't even learn in med school, but it's been discussed by some cultures for thousands of years. Today, we're going to make sense of what is so often overly complicated and talk about your brain and food. You definitely don't want to miss this one.
Eating the right foods is supportive of brain health, and a healthy diet can also help reduce the risk of inflammation, the risk of heart attacks and heart disease, diabetes, insulin resistance, or obesity, which are in turn risk factors for more severe symptoms of a brain condition. So really, we need to look at the human body using a holistic or integrative lens, where the choices you make are important for your brain and for your body as a whole.
I am Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and this is the Better Brain Blueprint.
Having a healthier brain feels empowering.
Limitless.
Inspiring.
It feels peaceful and it feels hopeful.
It is so essential to your health.
Your brain is your greatest asset.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your brain.
Improve your life.
Improve your life.
There is no alternative.
Live better longer.
You deserve that.
In this episode, we'll be covering powerful, life-changing information. Remember, if you want full access to the Better Brain Blueprint now and for years to come, you can invest in the entire series, along with the exclusive bonus materials right now for a special price that is only available during this broadcast. Don't wait. Your brain will thank you. For any number of reasons, we've too often ignored the powerful links between food and our brains. Frankly, when I was in training, we really only thought about the food-brain link by making sure people ate enough calories, didn't get a deficiency in a vitamin or a mineral, and that their blood sugar didn't crash. Yet now we know there's a whole world of possibility or liability for our brains that exists in every bite of food we take. With research coming out every day on how food can change our brains, it's vital that we take this conversation seriously. In fact, we're now learning not only that certain nutrients may help keep us sharp and our mood stable today and well into our later years, but that some dietary patterns have even been shown to help decrease symptoms of conditions like Alzheimer's and depression. Like I said, this is really important stuff. Let's start by thinking through the basic ways in which diet can impact our brains. First, our brains are made by the nutrients we consume. That means that our neurons, our glial cells, our blood vessels, and everything else in our skulls has to be constructed by what we put into our mouths, which, in my opinion, is reason enough to choose quality food over ultra-processed food. Simply put, if you're building a house that you want to enjoy for your entire life, wouldn't you want it to be built with the best materials? Next up, we know that our neurotransmitters are synthesized from precursors found in our diet. Tryptophan is converted into serotonin, tyramine turns into dopamine, and so on. Now, I do want to be careful here because this doesn't mean you should go out and take a bunch of tryptophan or tyramine, but it does mean that you should try to consume a balanced diet rich in a diversity of nutrients so you cover all your brain's bases for the necessary key building blocks. In addition, vitamins and minerals are essential to brain function. Magnesium is used in hundreds of reactions, while B vitamins like B12 and B1 are essential to healthy cognition. Then there's fiber, which we can't digest, but our gut microbiome just loves. When the gut bacteria break down fiber in our diet, they create molecules that are now thought to enter our brains and have benefits like amping up neuroplasticity and decreasing inflammation. Beyond this, there's an incredible family of nutrients called phytochemicals, which are found primarily in plants that may have positive impacts on our brain function. Like I said, this is big and important stuff. It's a big and important topic. So stay tuned to learn how to fuel your brain properly, starting today.
I think it's very clear that there is a profound relationship between our dietary choices and what's going on in our brains in terms of our decline in cognitive function, our decline in memory, all aspects of cognitive function directly related to the food choices that we make.
Diet is very important for brain health, and its impact on brain health has been underestimated for a really long time. But you need to think that many physicians, until maybe 15 years ago, thought that exercise had no impact on brain health either. So the field is evolving, and we're becoming more and more open and more aware of the fact that the choices we make do have consequences for the health of our brains. Now, why is diet important for brain health? Well, number one, because the nutrients that we obtain for specific foods have the ability to literally get inside our brains and be incorporated in a myriad of cellular functions and even in brain tissue, which is very important to keep in mind when we're tempted to eat something that's not so healthy for us. There's a good chance that part of that food is going to turn into the very fabric of our brains.
People have asked many, many times at many different levels, how does the diet influence the brain? And that's a really interesting question that has a very, very complex answer if you deep dive into really trying to answer it completely. I don't think that any individual, no matter what level of knowledge they have, can completely answer that, because I still think we're still learning about the role that the complex diet plays in modulating aspects of brain function, brain chemistry. But we have learned some really interesting things that I think are translatable into our daily lives and have what I call kind of news to use activity. So what are they? Well, we know that protein contains amino acids. That's what it's made up of. And there are 20 naturally occurring amino acids. Some of those amino acids that are found in our foods, that are found in the protein of our foods, have more direct relationship to brain chemistry than others. And so we hear about the essential amino acids like tryptophan and phenylalanine, tyrosine, that influence both the serotonin levels of the body and the dopamine levels of the body, which are neurotransmitters that help to regulate mood, mind, memory, and behavior. So that would be three of the amino acids that are important. Secondly, we know that carbohydrate plays a role both directly and indirectly. Indirectly, it plays a role because if it's simple carbohydrate like sugar, highly refined starch, then it influences blood sugar, and blood sugar influences brain chemistry directly because the brain has insulin receptors, and it is influenced by how blood sugar is stabilized. If blood sugars are going over the map, like Andes Mountains one moment and the Death Valley the next down in the depths, that the brain chemistry follows that, and your mood follows that as well. So we know that carbohydrate plays a role. We even know that non-digestible carbohydrate that we call fiber plays a role because it can serve as a prebiotic that influences the bacteria in our gut that then indirectly or directly influence our brain chemistry.
So getting enough fat is really critical for your brain. But you can't go wrong with the good fats from nuts and seeds, from olive oil, from avocados, from omega-3 fats from the right fish, small fish, sardines, herring, mackerel, anchovies, all that's great. So fat's pretty darn important for your brain.
As you've just heard, fat is key to a healthy brain. Some of the best sources of omega-3 fatty acids come from plant sources as well as from fatty fish and other seafood. However, if you choose not to eat animal products, you can get great omega-3 fats from algae-based sources.
It's very difficult for people to get their arms around the notion that their brain is stuff, and it is constructed from food. The foods that we eat are broken down to provide the raw materials to build a better brain, or to threaten the brain, as the case may be. It doesn't come from thin air. The brain is as much a physical, structural organ as anything else in the body. For some reason, we conflate this brain and mind dichotomy, and therefore have this notion that the brain and mind exist somewhere else, and nothing we do is influential.
If we actually ask when we eat a meal, what happens to it? We don't absorb those nutrients directly. We have to break them down. It's a process of digestion. And so it's ingestion, digestion, and then assimilation. And what we assimilate once we eat food is not just solely the debris of the molecules of food, protein, carbohydrate, fat, vitamins, and minerals that we consume in the diet, but it also is the secondary byproducts of the way that our food was eaten by the microbiome, the bugs that live in our gut, 3 to 5 pounds of living organisms in the average intestinal tract of humans, adults, that are doing their own metabolism and producing their own waste products and having their own personality. So those molecules can be expressed and absorbed into our blood as well. And we find that many of those are immunologically active.
Roughly 12,000 years ago, our ancestors made a major decision. Many of them stopped the typical hunter-gatherer tradition and instead focused on growing crops. This is called the agricultural revolution. In some ways, this departure from traditional methods of food gathering was an incredible gift to humanity because it gave us more stability, more flexibility, gave us the chance to diversify our interests, to build and to create. However, it also was associated with a decrease in dietary diversity. Now fast forward to the last 100 years, and we see that another revolution in food has occurred. We've transitioned from eating real, minimally processed food to a place where the vast majority of our calories come from just a few food crops and from highly processed versions of food. In fact, the majority of our calories today come from some form of corn, rice, wheat, or soy, and exist in some version of ultra-processed food. Just about all food researchers and educators agree that this has been catastrophic for our overall health. And we're now learning that this is, unsurprisingly, a disaster for our brain health, including our mental health. Our modern day diet may be best described as the SAD, the standard American diet, and it's literally killing us early. Packed with added sugar and preservatives and stripped of key nutrients like vitamins and minerals, phytochemicals and fiber, it has everything we don't need, including tons of extra and unnecessary calories.
Problem with modern lifestyles is that we're consistently consuming high carb diets all the time, every day, and there's no time off. So the mitochondria are just working all day long, every day. People are eating all day long. They're snacking all day long, and they're eating packaged processed foods, which are basically like garbage fuel.
More recently, with the incredible changes in human nutrition that have happened over the past 100 to 200 years, I'd say that some of the biggest factors have included the dramatic reduction in our fiber intake because of the ever-increasing refinement of our food, and the way that reduction of our fiber intake has threatened bowel function, and more importantly, the health and functionality of our gut bacteria and the role that they play in brain health. But I think the other really important fact to consider is that suddenly there's been an incredible and dramatic increase in our consumption of both refined carbohydrate and sugar itself. And the reason they're so related is that refined carbohydrate dramatically increases blood sugar, and of course consumption of sugar does that handily, quite readily. And we know that even since the 1920s, the amount of sugar that we consume has increased by as much as 5-fold. Our DNA isn't ready for that. Our physiology, which is the downstream manifestation of our genetic code, isn't ready for this level of sugar. And it is really so directly responsible for our metabolic mayhem, our diabetes, our increased rates of coronary artery disease, cancer, and yes, dramatically related to our declining brain health. Our change in diet that's happened over the past 200 years and significantly over the past 100 years has dramatically threatened brain health.
The phytochemical family of nutrients is thousands of different individual molecules that phytochemists love to study because it's a lifelong treasure trove of things to study. These are in different foods in different quantities in different molecular configurations. Presently, in the standard American diet, we get most of our phytochemicals from coffee and tea. That shows you how little we're getting from vegetables. And the amount we get is generally less than 1,000 milligrams a day. It's been recommended, if you look at cultures around the world with healthy people that live into their 90s and 100s, like the blue zone areas, those people are getting like 3.5 grams of these from their natural diets a day because they're eating foods that are rich in these phytochemicals. They have all the color and flavor of the natural food. And they get the benefit then, which some people, and me being one, feel that contributes to why they stay healthy throughout the course of 90 to 100 years of living. So does that relate directly to brain function? Yes, because we now see studies showing reduced, certainly in animal models, reduction in dementia, reduction in neurological injury that leads to the loss of neuronal function in the hippocampus or in regions of the amygdala. So we know now that these are very important nutrients.
People are over consuming refined carbohydrates and sugar in our modern diets, and so much more than we'd ever had in the past.
When we look, for example, at existing hunter-gatherer populations on our planet, even today, we see that those individuals who are eating more of a diet that is reflective of the diet of our hunter-gatherer forebears, that they have incredible preservation of their brain function later in life, even in those who carry the so-called Alzheimer's gene, the APOE4 allele.
Chances are that you've heard a lot of arguments about the best diet. For example, some people say you shouldn't eat beans, and other people call beans superfoods. But one thing just about everyone agrees on is that we're eating way too much added sugar. Added sugar has many names. It's brown rice syrup and cane sugar and high fructose corn syrup and evaporated fruit juice and so many more. The thing about added sugar is it's hiding in most foods and beverages you buy in the grocery store. Research shows that the average American is eating around 60 pounds of added sugar each year. To put that into perspective, a few hundred years ago, people were eating maybe a few pounds of added sugar a year. So this is a dramatic change, and in many ways it mirrors the increase in rates of conditions like diabetes, fatty liver disease, and brain diseases. In fact, we're now learning that through the effects on molecules like insulin and pathways like inflammation, that eating too much added sugar may be toxic to brain health.
There's no question that a big topic is sugar consumption, and rightfully so. Our consumption of sugar has skyrocketed over the past century, and we are visualizing the health consequences of what this change in our diets has done. We can talk about increasing rates of various diseases, but let's relate sugar to the brain. Dietary sugar directly threatens brain health quite dramatically.
One of the first things that I personally did, and I do with most of my clients, is try to get people off of sugar for at least a month, because there's so much sugar in our diet still. And just eliminating sugar can be one of the most powerful things that you can do for your diet, and just trying to identify where is it coming from. I try not to get more than 25 grams of sugar a day, which is the American Heart Association recommendations. And most of the time, if I'm consuming any sugar in a processed food, for example, like almond milk, for example, I try to make sure that it's less than 5 grams a serving, which is usually an unsweetened product. Very, very typically 5 grams or less is not a highly sweetened product.
It's all about metabolism. We've got to do everything we can to keep our blood sugar in check. And that is really fundamentally why consuming glucose in the form of sugar is so devastating to the brain, ultimately, because when our blood sugar goes up and we become insulin resistant, then the brain is not able to utilize sugar as a fuel. The brain does require insulin. Now you've set up a circumstance where insulin isn't working.
I'm actually even more leaning towards just when I need some sweet, I just have some fruit. I'm a big fan of berries. I love yellow dragon fruit. I love, frozen bananas in my smoothie. I don't do a ton of frozen banana, but I usually do like smoothies with frozen vegetables and frozen fruit together, because it actually lowers the glycemic impact and I get double amounts of phytonutrients. And so I'm always picking like frozen. I'll make like frozen kale or frozen purple cauliflower, and I'll use those in my smoothies because it'll give me the sweet that I need, but I won't be getting nearly as much of the sugar from tons and tons of fruit. So I'm not anti-fruit. There's no evidence that fruit contributes to diabetes. I really like a lot of juices in general. I'll do some green juice here and there, but not very often, not a huge serving of it. And so, yeah, I think it's a journey you have to go on with yourself to learn, what does your body tolerate, what does it not tolerate.
As I mentioned earlier in this series, our brains are incredibly active organs. In order to run smoothly, our brains require access to a steady stream of energy in the form of glucose. That glucose has to come from our bloodstream across the blood-brain barrier, so it can be used as fuel by our neurons and our glial cells to power our brain's mitochondria and keep us thinking and alive. Remember that I told you we have roughly 80 billion neurons? Well, each neuron may have millions of mitochondria. So that's how important consistent energy is for the brain. And it's why metabolic health and brain health are so closely linked. We're now seeing that metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes predict higher rates of depression and dementia. Even pre-diabetes and other seemingly less concerning states where people have trouble managing their blood sugar are being linked to higher rates of brain issues. Incredibly, we now know that over 1 in 3 Americans has prediabetes, and that around 90% of us have at least one characteristic of metabolic dysfunction. On the one hand, this is a major red flag for brain health risk. On the other hand, this is an incredible opportunity for us to both understand and intervene on our metabolic state to improve the health of our bodies and our brains.
It's so important for people to understand metabolism because metabolic dysfunction is behind most mental illness and most metabolic diseases like heart disease, cancer, diabetes, and dementia.
Metabolic health is very important for brain health. The brain is extremely metabolically active and it communicates with the rest of your body on a daily basis, really on a minute by minute basis. So whatever happens in the rest of your body, like metabolic disorders that can lead to insulin resistance or diabetes or inflammation, that also has an impact on brain health in turn. So the health of our body from the neck down is extremely important for the health of our body from the neck up. And your metabolism is really the key to life. So it's important to have good metabolic health.
Our psychological state has a very strong impact on our metabolic health and even our blood sugar levels. And in many ways, the mind controls metabolism. And in a either virtuous or sometimes vicious cycle, the metabolism also, of course, can impact our mind and how we think and feel.
Metabolism is so critical to health. And when I talk about metabolism with my clients, I like to start first with a definition. A lot of people think of metabolism as being how fast or slow you burn calories. But metabolism is so much bigger than that. It's really the aggregate of all of the biochemical processes that are happening in the body. So it's a much bigger concept than most people realize. That's where I typically start. And certainly it's related to energy production. I find that somewhere around 69 to 70% of the clients that I see are struggling with energy in some way. What I want is to be able to get folks to care about metabolism, brain metabolism, peripheral metabolism, decades before they get a scary diagnosis. So the way I think about it is that a static snapshot of your blood work performed once a year by your primary care doctor, looking at something like your fasting glucose and your hemoglobin A1C, maybe your lipids, your triglycerides, that is woefully inadequate in terms of really helping us understand all of those biochemical processes that are happening in the body that together add up to your metabolism.
Metabolic dysfunction is absolutely an epidemic in the United States and around the world. And while there are conditions with a strong genetic component, the vast majority of cases of metabolic dysfunction may be preventable. When we consider that metabolism drives our brain's energy, our brain cells' ability to function, and contributes to mood and risk for dementia, we realize just how important it is to take steps today to improve our metabolic health. Luckily, there are things you can do right now to help understand and improve your metabolic state.
The elephant in the room of modern American healthcare is that the vast majority of Americans now are experiencing metabolic dysfunction, which means a problem with how their bodies are fundamentally making energy. So this animating life force process that's happening inside our cells is problematic because of our modern Western environment. And this is creating a metabolic dysfunction epidemic that's affecting all parts of our body, especially our brains. And this is why I'm so passionate about it, because metabolic dysfunction is the root cause of so many symptoms and problems. It's a really high yield place for us to focus in healthcare to optimize so that we can, minimize maximal morbidity in our country and our world. Metabolism is a process that happens in every single cell in the body. And again, every single cell in the body needs energy produced effectively for it to function properly. So metabolic dysfunction showing up in different cell types around the body can look like very different things. If this is happening in a liver cell, it could look like fatty liver disease. If this is happening in a brain cell, depending on what region it's in, it could look like Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, anxiety, fibromyalgia, migraines. If this is happening in an ovary cell, it could look like polycystic ovarian syndrome. If it's happening in a blood vessel, like a small blood vessel of the eye, kidney, or penis, that could be retinopathy, chronic kidney disease, or erectile dysfunction. If it's happening in the lining of blood vessels in bigger vessels, it could look like heart disease or stroke. And so really what we're talking about is a core fundamental process that's being hijacked and disturbed by our modern industrial Western environment. And that showing up as all these different things by the nature of this happening in different cell types around the body. So metabolic dysfunction could show up in one set of patterns and symptoms in one person and a very different set of patterns and symptoms in another person. But if you actually looked inside that cell at what's going on, there's likely a problem with the metabolic processes.
One of the things that a lot of people have forgotten is like eating till you're 80% full. And when you eat really and you get really full and you just really stuff yourself with food, that fuel has to go somewhere. And you really can only metabolize so much food all at once. And the reality is that a lot of people who are really sedentary are set up for not being able to metabolize the amount of food that they're consuming at the rate that they are eating. And so as a result, this fuel just back up and it just starts leaking into the viscera. Fundamentally, overeating the wrong foods is really, really not great for metabolism because it basically creates metabolic gridlock in the mitochondria. So they just can't metabolize what's coming in. And so it's going to build up in the bloodstream and on the outside. And the bloodstream can only carry it for so long before it says, okay, I'm going to store this somewhere. And usually what happens is, if you're healthy, you're lucky, you'll store it in the peripheral fat stores. But when those fat stores fill up, you start getting ectopic fat locations start getting filled.
The chronic stressors are huge too. People who have had childhood events that are traumatic, adverse childhood events, tend to be at higher rates for metabolic issues down the road when they're adults. People who are lonely tend to have worse metabolic outcomes or living in states of fear.
As we've just learned, eating too much food, especially unhealthy processed food, is linked to worse metabolic function. We also heard that chronic stress can damage metabolic health. We'll come back to address diet strategies shortly, and we'll be diving deep into the topic of stress management in episode 11. But one question you may have right now is how to know whether your metabolic state is healthy or out of whack. Here, there are a number of different variables that can be measured using lab work. Most commonly, people look at a fasting blood sugar level, a triglyceride level, and a measurement of 3-month blood sugar levels called the hemoglobin A1C, or just the A1C. If any of these three are high, they may be an indication that metabolic state is not optimized. However, there are a number of other ways to look at metabolic state. More recently, a number of experts have drawn attention to the value of a fasting insulin level, which may be elevated before blood sugar levels start going up. Another interesting variable is uric acid, which is commonly measured as a part of a metabolic panel, but has only recently gained attention as a marker of metabolic dysfunction when it's elevated. However, I do want to flag that some of the most readily available indicators of poor metabolic health are things like a high waist to hip ratio, an elevated BMI, and high blood pressure.
Measuring metabolism, the simple things are obviously like looking for markers of insulin resistance on the outside of a body. A lot of people don't realize that acne is actually a marker of insulin resistance. And a lot of people don't realize that like their acne could be caused by their blood sugar dysregulation. So once I cleared up my blood sugar, my acne just went away, which is pretty surprising. So then there's just like markers of metabolic syndrome, right? So low HDL, high triglycerides, high blood pressure, high fasting glucose. These markers need to be, and as I mentioned before, waist circumference, these need to be looked at as well. These are really important markers for developing metabolic disease.
The really positive thing is that it is so easy to test our metabolic health and really understand it for ourselves. You don't even need a doctor to do this. There are over-the-counter things that you can buy that can tell you about it. Your standard lab tests that you might get with a physical can give you a clue about it. Even a tape measure where you're measuring your waist circumference can help with this. So I would say the best ways to do it are to look at the last lab set of standard labs your doctor ordered for your physical and start to dig into the numbers a little bit more. So one thing that's probably going to be on there is a fasting glucose level. That's very standard. And currently we diagnose prediabetes as a fasting glucose between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter, and diabetes would be 126 or above. And then normal would be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. You can also look at your cholesterol panel, which is kind of interesting, and look at a couple numbers, including your triglycerides and your HDL cholesterol. And there's actually a ratio that you can do. Just use the calculator on your phone and divide triglycerides by HDL. There's going to be 4 numbers on your cholesterol panel. It's going to be total cholesterol, HDL cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, and triglycerides. So find the triglycerides and the HDL and do a ratio. And ideally, we'd like to see that ratio to basically be less than 1, which is essentially, if you imagine that your triglycerides were 90 and your HDL was 90, that ratio would be 1. And as that number gets higher, 1.5, 2, 2.53, it's a sign of potentially increasing insulin resistance. So just to sum that up, you want triglycerides to be low and HDL to be higher, generally speaking. One more test that I'll mention, I mean, we could talk, there's lots of different things you can look at for metabolic health. These are just some of the easiest and most accessible ones. But if you have if you're able to, I think asking your doctor for a fasting insulin test is one of the best possible tests you can do. I would say it is my number 1 favorite test for understanding metabolic health.
The Better Brain Blueprint is all about empowering you to lead a longer, better, happier, and healthier life. No matter your health history, you have the ability to improve your brain function right now by incorporating the information from this series into your daily life. This cutting-edge information just isn't available anywhere else. And that's why owning all of the expert interviews, the transcripts, and the supporting materials is so incredibly valuable. I highly recommend making the Better Brain Blueprint, along with the bonus materials, part of your family library. By making some simple lifestyle changes, you can create lasting improvements in your health and in your life. These changes may not only lower your risk for conditions like Alzheimer's and mood disorders, they will almost certainly improve your brain function right now. You might notice that you start thinking more clearly, forgetting less, and generally feeling better throughout the day. Sometimes the hardest part in taking action and making these lifestyle changes is figuring out where to start. If you're ready to start right now, the bonus materials include resources that will help you apply this knowledge to your life, one step at a time. We interviewed the world's leaders in general brain health, mood disorders, Alzheimer's disease, and more. And we received some fantastic, actionable information from each of our experts. Unfortunately, we didn't have room to include it all in this series, but we know it's critical, life-changing information that has the power to transform your health. That's why the bonus materials also include the full-length interviews from all of the experts you've seen throughout this series. The great thing about owning this series is that you can easily share it with friends and family and watch their lives change too. In fact, if you found this series helpful, I invite you to share this broadcast event with a friend or with your loved ones. You just might change their lives and their destiny. The most important investment in your life is an investment in your health. Click the button on this page to invest in your Better Brain Blueprint today. Our brains are built by and dramatically influenced by the quality of what we eat. And beyond this, our brain's metabolism is going to be altered based on sleep, exercise, stress, and much more. So how do we leverage this information today? What is a brain healthy diet? Study after study is telling us that the best diet for overall health, as well as brain health, is one that minimizes intake of ultra-processed foods and prioritizes a diversity of real, whole food-based sources of nutrition. Practically speaking, this means shopping on the periphery of the grocery store and avoiding the processed food in the center aisles. It means loading up on fresh produce and avoiding foods with added sugars. Specific to metabolic wellness, it also means eating more colorful fruits and vegetables that are rich in fiber and largely avoiding colorless, starchy vegetables like white potatoes, white bread, and white rice. If you're looking for a more concrete direction to pursue with your diet, many studies have shown that the Mediterranean pattern diet is one of the best for brain health. This is a diet that follows the guidelines I just described and tends to include olive oil and other foods rich in phytochemicals or phytonutrients, and emphasizes fish and seafood as opposed to red meat. There's also a variant of this diet called the Mediterranean Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, or the MIND diet, which has shown promise in brain health conditions. While some early data indicates that a more restrictive diet, like a ketogenic diet, may be of value in certain populations, the best large-scale data for most people when it comes to brain health appears to be a more balanced diet that includes a wide diversity of nutrient-rich, minimally processed foods. I also want to address two other variables here: the quantity and the timing of eating. Overall, it's much less likely that you'll overdo the calories when you're eating whole, real foods, but many have recommended only eating till you're around 80% full, and that's probably a good rule of thumb. Finally, many recent studies suggest that having a gap between your last meal of the day and your first meal of the morning of around 12 or so hours may help give your body time to digest and rejuvenate itself.
You know, your brain is mostly fat, so you got to be really careful with the kind of fats you consume and really trying to limit those highly refined rancid seed oils found in packaged processed foods and fast foods and fried foods. Those are the real toxic products. You don't want to make your brain out of those oils. You want your brain made out of healthy fats.
We know that the types of foods that we in America are eating are devastating to the brain. For example, we now recognize that there is this concept of ultra-processed foods. And these are foods that are so highly processed that they dramatically play into disturbing our metabolic health and threatening the brain. Estimated now that 58% of calories that are consumed daily by the average American are coming from ultra-processed foods. One recent study demonstrated that at the level of just 20% of your daily calories coming from ultra-processed foods, there's a dramatic increased rate of decline of your general cognitive function and your executive function as well. And again, that's only at 20% of your calories coming from this type of food, and about 3 times as much as what the average American consumes.
You know, plant foods are being seen more and more as having so many extremely nutrient-dense nutrients, vitamins, mineral, antioxidants, phytochemicals that are helping our brain health. So adding these in and having the color of those foods really be something we embrace is so important to our everyday health, not just our physical health, but also our mental well-being. And that is one of the reasons why we consume these foods. They also contain fiber, and fiber is extremely important for the gut microbiome.
So on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate your diet, right? It doesn't have to be perfect, but just like, is it a 6, a 7, an 8? But just kind of shows you where you have room for improvement. But on the other side, it's not just what you eat, it's how you eat. And it's when you eat, right? Some people say it's when you eat because of intermittent fasting and other factors, not eating too close at night, right? But it's also how you eat. Some people are so stressed with how they eat, or they're eating while they're at work, and they're not in that parasympathetic rest and digest. So I would just remind you, it's not just the food you're eating. Like I'll have a great race car driver or sports, people that need to be mentally just sharp and razor sharp. It's not just what they're eating, it's like how they're eating. Are they getting in that parasympathetic rest and digest? Some people are so stressed with their diet, it's kind of canceling out maybe any benefit they're getting because of that anxiety. And chronic stress will shrink the human brain.
One of the things I think that people haven't long recognized, although now in the 21st century, I think that we're starting to see more of this, is the role of phytonutrients, plant compounds. And there are many, there are thousands of them. They outnumber the vitamins, minerals, and the macronutrients. And we're starting to learn about the role in cellular health and just even the overall body systems that they play different functions in. This idea of a phytonutrient gap means that most people aren't filling their quota of essentially eating the rainbow of foods. That's the simple way to say it. So people are shortcutting their fruits, vegetables, their consumption of plant foods. And I think that when we look at the literature, we can arm wrestle so many different things. We can arm wrestle eggs, soy, meat, dairy. But when it comes to fruits and vegetables, at least those two categories, there's a preponderance of evidence to suggest that they're beneficial for many different populations of people and for many different chronic diseases. So the phytonutrient gap really refers to looking at the consumption of these fruits and vegetables and how people fall short.
So what food should I be eating? What's your preferred list? Well, I bet everybody in this field that has studied this probably has their own top list, but I'll give you mine just as quote, food for thought. So let's first go to the cruciferous vegetable family. You know them because they're kind of smelly when you cook them, kind of sulfurous in odor. So these are broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage. And they have a series of phytochemicals in them that are called glucosinolates. That's a long name. But it turns out when you eat these foods, these phytochemicals, which are unique to those family of vegetables, they're then processed by your digestive system in a unique way that liberates out of those glucosinolates after they're digested.
My top tips for good metabolic health would be a consistent exercise routine, a healthy, balanced diet with plenty of antioxidants and lean protein and anti-inflammatory compounds, and an overall healthy lifestyle in general, because everything is related. If you sleep poorly, your hormones will suffer, and then your metabolic health will suffer in turn, and then your digestion will suffer in turn. Everything is related. So I would say, number one, make sure that you go to your doctor for regular checkups. If you do have a metabolic disorder, that needs to be addressed, probably by means of medical care and lifestyle adjustments. Some people prefer to just go the lifestyle route. Some people prefer prescription medications. I think whatever works for you and for your lifestyle that is sustainable and that you can really implement in a consistent way, that is the right way to start. I would say that lifestyle really can make a difference in whether or not the changes are permanent.
The typical diet in the United States is actually the standard American diet, called the SAD diet for a reason. It's also called the Western diet. And it's really rich in processed, highly processed sort of junk foods and fast foods, a lot of foods, a ton of added sugars. And these are not the healthiest options for our brain. Some of the diets that have been researched for optimal brain health and improved conditions like depression and anxiety include things like the Mediterranean diet. I love to talk about the Mediterranean diet because that really is more inclusive of other cultures that don't only eat what is in the Mediterranean region, but it is still heavy on plant-rich foods, those plant polyphenols, rich sources of fiber, the healthy fats like extra virgin olive oil and avocado oil, and clean proteins as well. So, for example, someone in East Asia might eat black soybeans or black beans instead of chickpeas. It's just an example of being inclusive so that people are still eating the healthy principles of a Mediterranean or Mediterranean diet.
I think we really should take into account the notion of when we eat and how long we go specifically without eating. How long are we fasting each day? The first meal of the day has gained the moniker of break fast because we aren't, most of us, getting up in the middle of the night and eating, although I guess some people do. So it's the time that we're breaking the fast that is induced by the fact that you had your dinner, you engaged in some kind of activity for a couple of hours, you went to sleep, then you awakened, and now it's time for you to consume food. Well, the reality is that it looks like it's much better for us to protract that period of time until we finally break our fast. Whether this time-restricted eating on a daily basis is actually able to activate something called autophagy, or the ability for us to rid our cells of damaged cellular components, is a topic of hot debate right now. My sense is that it probably does. We're looking at the animal data and the human data. This is an important function, autophagy. The ridding of our bodies of damaged cellular debris is really, really important. And I think that we are going to see that time-restricted eating does that. We know that fasting over a period of time can clearly activate those pathways.
Getting rid of the refined ultra-processed grains, getting rid of the refined ultra-processed sugars, and getting rid of the refined industrially processed seed oils. And those three things, if you commit to moving towards eliminating those from your diet, basically only good things happen, because one of those three things, or all three, are in almost every processed food on the shelf. And so when you say no to just those three things, it actually ends up driving you towards a much more natural whole foods diet. And so, you want to be filling your plate, obviously, with, colorful, nutrient-rich, whole, unprocessed foods as possible. And one of the easiest ways to do that is by, eliminating the stuff that has those three ingredients. You want to eat as close to nature as possible for so many reasons. One, because ultra-processed foods totally hijack our satiety cues and signals to drive us to eat more than we actually need for health. And whole foods tend to stimulate our satiety pathways. So simply by eating unprocessed or minimally processed foods, you're going to want to eat less, because our biology is so incredibly nuanced to help us do that. So that's just, if overeating or eating too much is something that is a struggle for you, which it has definitely been for me in my life, just moving towards whole foods is, I think, the lowest hanging fruit for helping to modify those cravings.
I'm not really depriving myself of anything, but I'm definitely not indulging in nearly as much of the alternative sugars, because I do believe that they can cause metabolic dysfunction and gut dysfunction. And I think you have to be really careful about your gut if you want to live a long and healthy life.
The conversation always comes up about certain foods, alcohol, et cetera. But I think one of the areas people love to talk about is coffee. And I think that the balance of research would indicate that coffee is a very, very good choice as it relates to the brain and as it relates to risk for brain decline. I'd say that within reason, a couple of cups of coffee a day, that scientific literature would really support the notion that that is good for us.
We've covered a whole lot of ground in this episode, but I hope you've come away feeling inspired. Our food choices are a powerful lever for overall and brain health, and there's something we get to influence several times a day. Yes, it's true that the majority of foods you see in the grocery store, vending machine, and elsewhere are no longer good for us, but it doesn't mean it has to be difficult to eat healthier meals. Like most everything else in this series, dietary change is a matter of creating healthier habits and sticking to them. One of the best places to start is by making a healthier grocery shopping list that includes lots of fresh produce and excludes anything with added sugar. I'm also excited to take this conversation with you one step further as we explore the fascinating new science of the gut-brain connection in the next episode of this series. You definitely don't want to miss it.
Brain health matters because every single moment of our experience on this planet is totally dictated by how well our brain is functioning. And our entire perception of the world is dependent on our brain. And so anything that we can do to improve our brain health is going to improve our lives. And from my perspective, optimizing metabolic health, getting blood sugar levels under control, improving insulin sensitivity are all some of the best ways we can support our brain.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Better Brain Blueprint. I'm Dr. Austin Perlmutter, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next episode.